Okay.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question before we begin?
Yeah.
Why is there a bowling pin behind you?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad that you asked. Honestly, it wasn't there when I started. And if it's there now, I'm assuming it's a miracle. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. No, but it's just like if it wasn't there and now it's
It was
there.
there last week, Rabbi.
Okay, fine. You got me. It's my son won that bowling pin as a trophy or souvenir when he did well in a bowling game or something.
Cool.
Or so he tells me. That's the story that I got. I have no reason to not believe it. Whatever. Anyway, I like to tell people that it's when I bowl 300, but that's not.
That's a miracle.
That's a miracle. Yes.
300 turns.
But even miracles have to be somewhat believable. I mean, come on, not that one, not over my shoulder. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so let's get started. We'll do a formal introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second session of miracles. And I am very excited to be here with you. This evening, we have another incredible session. I'll tell you, the other miracle is that David joined us. David got on. So David, welcome. You are our latest miracle in joining. Okay, I am going to, the way we do this is, we start, hey David, I am going to start off by having everybody muted. That is not at all meant to be offensive. All it's meant to be is pragmatic, so that the background is nice and soft, and everyone, or whatever, nice and quiet, and everyone can hear the ideas that I'm trying to share. At any time, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or raise your digital hand, or just unmute yourself and ask the question at any point in time. This is meant to be a conversation. Okay, let's recap what we explored last week. So last week we did some introductory material about miracles and about nature, but let's move past the introduction because we did it last week. We established that there are three types of miracles. Okay, there are three types of miracles. Number one, there are miracles that are quite obviously miraculous. In other words, a miracle that you know is a miracle. Like when you see that happening, you're like, I know what that is. That's a miracle, right? When the Nile River turns to blood, you're not thinking, well, maybe. You're like, that's a miracle. When the sea of reeds splits, and according to our tradition, it didn't just split in one place. It split into 12 different channels. Do you guys know this? The Red Sea, when it split, or the Sea of Reeds, when it split, there were actually 12 different paths, one for each of the tribes. Legit. Yeah. So when that happens, you're like, wait a second. I've seen David Blaine do cool things, and David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. True. But splitting the Sea of Reeds into 12 different channels, I mean, that's miraculous, right? So certain things, especially when we read the biblical narratives, certain things evoke a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of that's wild. And we immediately say that is miraculous. That's a miracle. Okay, that's category one, miracles. Category number two are miracles that are not so easily seen as miracles, which means that these are miracles. In the language of Kabbalah, these are nisim, miracles, which are meluvash, which are enclosed, like garbed, in teva, in nature. Not the sandals, that would be weird, teva, in nature. In other words, these are miracles that when you look at them, you might not see immediately the miraculous aspect of the miracle. It might look natural, until you think about it for a little bit and you realize, wait a second, that was a little bit too incredibly exquisite. That was too perfect to be just happenstance, to be just something that just happened. It must have been guided by something beyond. It must have been a miracle, but it assumed somewhat of a natural form. That's category two. The example of this type of miracle, as he says, as we studied in the last week in our text, is the example of the miracles of Hanukkah and Purim. So these are the two rabbinic holidays. We have biblical holidays such as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot. These are all biblical holidays. God instructed Moses, who instructed us, and we've been doing it for 3,300 years. But there are a few Jewish holidays that are absolutely universally accepted, but are not of biblical origin. And those are the two holidays of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, right? You all love Hanukkah. And Purim, which gets its name from the message to the bartender, Purim another. That was a joke, which I may have said last week. Okay, so these are the two rabbinic holidays, and they commemorate incredible moments of salvation. Not in that sense, in the miraculous way in which the Jews survived a diabolical plot against them. In the case of Hanukkah, it was the Syrian Greeks who rose up to Hellenize, to assimilate the Jewish people. There were Maccabees, there was guerrilla warfare, and God delivered the many in the hands of the few, the mighty in the hands of the weak, and we won, and we found the oil. It lasted for 8 days, and the rest is history. Now we eat greasy foods. Okay, and spin the dreidel, and yeah, all that good stuff, and have a great time. That is a miracle. But it didn't happen in a way that poof, the Syrian Greek army disappeared, and we reclaimed the temple without any effort, right? Poof, it just happened. No, there was strategy, there was warfare, guerrilla warfare, hiding in caves, bows and arrows. I mean, there was a whole war that was fought. Right? So although it was miraculous in how it ended, but it went through perhaps natural means. And Purim, yeah, so Mark is putting the chat to me saying Purim is even more of a natural miracle, which is about what I'm about to get to right now. When it comes to the story of Purim, like I explained last week, so what happens? There's a decree against the Jewish people that's put on by Haman, one of the king Ahasuerus' advisors, and the decree is annulled ultimately through the intervention of Esther, who is the queen, who happens to be Jewish. All right, it all worked out. Thank God the queen was Jewish. If not, who knows what would happen, God forbid. So one could look at that story and say, well, it was nature. It wasn't a miracle. It was just good luck, good fortune. It was convenient turn of events. However, you look a little bit deeper and you realize, as I mentioned last week, how every turn of the story, every plot twist was exactly designed. You know, even in the negative points of the story, or when it's looking bad for the Jews, all of that stuff is a setup for how everything flips dramatically for the good. Like Haman or Haman creating a gallows that are 50 cubits high, well, that actually works out to the advantage because he himself is hanged upon those gallows, and that becomes a defining moment where everyone can see, etc. In other words, like even the parts of the story that are negative flip around to be positive, and every detail of the story is absolutely significant. So one could say, no miracle. What are you talking about? There's no miracle here. The Jews got lucky. There was a queen. Queen Esther was Jewish. You could say that. But if you think about it, and I think if you think about it a little bit, you realize this is too guided. It's too designed to be just happenstance or just natural occurrence. This must be a miracle, but a miracle that assumes a natural form, somewhat of a natural form. It's a miracle that is working through the garments of nature. So it's being guided by God. Something out of the ordinary is happening. But God is not just, poof, making Haman disappear, right? Bringing frogs, blood, frogs, lice, hail, darkness, death of the firstborn, miraculous. God is not pulling any, wild miracles. God is performing a miracle that has somewhat of an alibi, right? Think about it, right? Some miracles you can see. It's like, hey, that's a miracle. I can recognize. And some miracles have an alibi. In other words, they have a way that you can look at it and say, well, maybe it's not a miracle. That's the second category of miracles. Category 3 are miracles that even after they happen, sometimes you won't even recognize that a miracle happened. In other words, there's a turn of fortune that is so what I'm looking for, so innocent, no, so nuanced,
Coincidental?
no, so what?
So coincidental?
Coincidental, or maybe subtle. It's such a subtle turn of events, things worked out and you had no idea what could have been in the way. There's a really good example of this in the Torah. I was thinking about mentioning this last week, but I'll mention it right now. There's a story in Torah where, as the Jews are advancing toward the land of Israel, after 40 years of wandering the desert, they finally set up the GPS and Waze, and they started going to land of Israel. And as they're passing through a valley, the valley was between two mountain ranges, or two mountains or hills, whatever. And before they got into the valley, what happened was there were enemies. There were enemies that were waiting in the caves of those mountaintops, ready to pulverize, God forbid, the Jewish people, to drop, kind of like Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner style, like drop the anvil type thing on the Jews, but like in a serious way. What happened was, before the Jews even got to that place, they were still a little bit behind, traveling toward that area. The two mountains, the two ranges came together miraculously, and the enemy. Oh, interesting. Hold on, Mark. I'll mention that comment in a second. The enemy was crushed inside. Those that were in the caves were actually crushed by the other mountain that came together. Kind of one mountain, one side had like caves, and the other one had like boulders that protruded, and they came together and they got squished, and that was it. And then the Jews kind of just walked over. They didn't even know there was a valley. It was like a whole miraculous thing. They only found out later when they saw the blood. I don't get too graphic. When they saw that there was an enemy that was lying in wait that had been crushed. This is described in very terse terms, very briefly. I forget which chapter verse in the book of Numbers, but it's, toward the end of the book of Numbers, we read about this story. And the Jews, upon seeing some of the remains, if you will, without getting graphic, of the enemy that got crushed, they began singing a praise of God. Now, I always think about that story, and I think, how many times was there danger lying an hour away that was healed up, covered up before we got there, and we never found out about it later? Like, what could have been had something been a drop different? Sometimes we do, right? So we have the story, like, had we, been through that intersection a second sooner or a second later, the other guy came flying through without stopping on the red light, and we just made it through, right? And had we been a little slower or whatever, David, that happened with you? You got to unmute yourself.
Hi to Mark.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, good. Thank God everything is good and everything is healthy. Here's the idea. We don't even know how many times there was let's say, a potential danger that was averted by God. So there are so many miracles that we've experienced, that we benefited from, that we don't know about. As the Talmud says, these are the types of miracles, she'ein bal hanes makars nisai. The one who was the beneficiary of the miracle didn't even recognize the miracle. We don't even know. Now, sometimes years later or whatever, at some point later, we find out about it, we recognize and we thank Hashem for the miracle. But it's possible that these miracles might not even be known. So these are three types of miracles. Number one, miracles that are open and revealed, like you can't miss it. It's like so big, it breaks nature. Second type of miracle are miracles that are working through nature, so they're a little bit more subtle. And the third category are miracles that are so enclosed or garbed within the natural order that it doesn't even seem like a miracle. It seems simply like something natural and normal. Okay, Mark texted me or chatted with me. And by the way, anyone is free to chat with me at any point in time. I can see when it comes up. Founding of the state of Israel. So would that fall into category maybe 2 or 3? Yeah, or maybe 1. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak definitively about where, various things should fall. I think that it's somewhat of a judgment call, how you see it. It's all about perception. Do you see it as an obvious, blatant miracle where the rules of nature were broken? Category 1. Do you see it as a miracle where the rules of nature were not broken? In other words, the miracle itself respected the laws of nature, but you can still see it sticking out from the sides. That's 2. Or it's respecting laws of nature so much you don't even see the natural order. You don't even see nature, which would be category 3. You don't even see the miracle, which would be category 3. And again, I'll let you, you can think about that. David texts me some of the things that happened in the 6-Day War. Exactly. Yeah. Some of the incredible miracles that happened in the 6-Day War. Somebody who is being attentive and paying attention might say, well, it's category 1. How do you not think that's category 1? Somebody might say, well, no, it still happened through a military action and through good strategy. So maybe it's category 2. However you want to, you want to frame it. Either way, the bottom line is that we have these different forms of miracles, which brings me to the next piece of the conversation. And that is that when it comes to the different forms of miracles, let me pull up my discourse in the original. So when it comes to the miracles that are enclosed within nature, we say in Kabbalah that they are actually of a higher level than the miracles that shatter nature. So if we had to rank the miracles, we did category 1, 2, 3 as to how big and brash they are, right? That's how we were ordering them, sorting them before, ranking them before, by how brash they are. The brasher the miracle, the higher level it is. That's how we normally think. Kabbalah says not so fast. Kabbalah says that the miracles that operate within nature, in other words, operate kind of covertly, they operate kind of like incognito, those miracles are actually greater and more powerful than the other sort of miracles, and the miracles that break nature. So the more undercover a miracle is, the higher place it stems from. We said when only God alone recognizes the miracle, right? That means it's coming from God alone. In other words, God's pure essence, the highest. The highest miracles are the ones that you and I can't even see because it's so sublime. It's so sublime. It's so high that it comes in a way that's super smooth. No resistance to the natural world. When a miracle comes and makes a lot of noise, it's a miracle, but it's coming from a lower dimension of the divine. Tonight, we're going to break down that concept and understand rationally why. From a mystical place, from a spiritual, cosmological place, we'll understand why this statement is indeed true. In other words, why is it that the miracle that breaks nature, which seems to be the loudest miracle, why it actually comes from a lower place than the miracles that operate within the natural order? But again, that's something we're going to explore, but that's a statement that we made. And we also said, just to finalize one last point that we touched on last week, that what will happen in the Messianic era, what's Mashiach all about? Miracles that come from the highest place, but we'll still be able to see them, right? They're miracles that come from the pure divine essence from such a sublime place that normally won't be able to be perceived, and we'll still perceive them. That's what's going to happen in the Messianic era. Okay, now let's jump right in. I'm going to share my screen and let's study some miracle text. Here we go. Miracles study text. We're going to start from chapter number 2. Okay, chapter 2. Let me make the font size a drop bigger.
Rav,
Yeah.
what text is this again? What's the title of the Sefer?
This is coming from here.
Menachem Sefer.
Torah's Menachem Sefer Mamarim Malukit. This is basically from a discourse from 1952, Acharon Shal Pesach, the last day of Passover. This is what it looks like. Remember that show? Remember that show with the guy who you never saw his face? He was like hiding under a fence.
Yes, yes, yes.
Remember that guy? It was like a home improvement situation.
Home Improvement.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just saying, as I held the book over there, I was thinking that seems awfully familiar. Okay, let's jump in. That's the text. That's the original. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned this last week. It's never been translated before, but I wanted to teach it. So what did I do? I translated it. Okay, chapter number 2. Here we go. Now, we're kind of maybe switching gears a little bit to ask a question, but you'll see soon that it's about to get interesting. Welcome, Steve. Steve has joined us. Welcome, Steve. All right, you came at the perfect time. This is chapter 2. We are jumping right in. Now, there is a well-known question on this verse. The verse that our discourse began with, which is, quote, this is a prophecy from the book of Micha, which says, as the days you left from the land of Egypt, so I will show them wonders. Right? God says, just like when you left Egypt, there were miracles. So too in the future time, I will show them wonders. So here's the question. We asked a bunch of questions before last week, but here's a new question. Why does the verse say days in the plural? Right? It says, as the day, and this is a word file, so I can just highlight it. As the days you left from the land of Egypt. How many days did it take? It took 1 day. They left and they were gone. Right? So why does the verse say days? In the plural, the Exodus took place in 1 day. And he continues in the brackets. These are brackets from the original, by the way. In fact, recalling the Exodus from Egypt, the verse states, remember this day that you left Egypt. The Torah tells us to remember the Exodus, right? We have Passover. We recall the Exodus actually every day in our daily prayers. But the verse that tells us to do that says, remember this day that you left Egypt, day in the singular. And another verse states, so that you shall remember the day that you left the land of Egypt, day in the singular. So we left Egypt in 1 day. Now, it took another 49 days to get to Sinai and get to Torah. It took 40 years to get to the promised land. All of that is true. But leaving Egypt happened that first day. We walked outside the borders. We were free. So what does it mean in our verse, the verse about miracles, where it says, as the days you left from the land of Egypt show us the wonders? How many days was it? It's 1 day. Okay, so why then, to summarize the question, why then does our verse use the plural expression days? Okay, we can answer. Oh, I should mention, there are many different answers given, even within the mystical tradition. Before we get to the answer here, I mean, you're happy, you can read it with pleasure, but we're going to get to it. Let me share with you something that's not written here. So some Hasidic masters explain, some mystics explain, that the reason why the Torah uses the verse, or why Scripture uses the word days, plural, is to teach us that the Exodus, although historically it happened in 1 day, but the perpetual Exodus is something that needs to happen every single day of our lives. Every single day, we're meant to break out of some element of limitation, something that's holding us back from achieving our true potential. There's always something. And even when even though we may have broken out of our status quo limitation yesterday, well, today, what was new yesterday is now old. And that constitutes our limitation. What yesterday was our freedom, today is our limitation. So every day we're meant to break out. We're always meant to grow, and growth means disruption. We're always meant to disrupt the status quo. So that's one answer why Scripture uses the word days, plural, referring to the Exodus, to indicate that it's an ongoing daily process. But here he gives a different answer that relates to our discussion about miracles. And he says like this, we can answer this by saying that the leaving of the land of Egypt referenced in our verse is referring also to the splitting of the sea. we're not just referring to the day that we left Egypt, but also the experience that happened 7 days later of the splitting of the sea. And he continues in the brackets. Indeed, this is true of the daily commandment to remember the Exodus, which also includes the obligation to remember the splitting of the sea. So every single day, as I mentioned earlier, every single day we are to remember in our prayers the Exodus from Egypt. And in that prayer liturgy, in that text, we also recall the splitting of the sea. In fact, in the morning prayers, every single day, we recite the Song of the Sea, right? I think there was a Disney movie, Under the Sea, Under the Sea, do, 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 do. Okay. Or is that Into the Sea? Okay, the same is true. Who would have thought that that's where we ended up here? Okay, getting back inside the actual text. So the daily commandment to remember the Exodus includes the splitting of the sea. The same is true of the commandment to retell the story of the Exodus on the night of Passover. Hey, we're just coming from Passover now. So now we know, maybe it's a little bit too late, but for next year, we know, next year in Jerusalem, we'll also have to remember the splitting of the sea. We say in the Haggadah that whoever expounds on the story of the Exodus is praiseworthy. What does it mean, whoever expounds on the story? That means if you tell all the details. Don't skimp on the details. Get all the details going of that Exodus situation. And this includes retelling the story of the splitting of the sea. Like, and in the Dayenu, it's also there. Dayenu. We talk about if God had, taken us out but not split the sea for us, it would have been enough. Although you got to wonder, we would have been stuck, but whatever. That's for another class and another discussion, explaining each stanza of the Dayenu, like how that would have really been enough. But the point here is that the Exodus, although it was a one-day affair, part of that getting out of Egypt includes getting rid of the Egyptians, which really happened. The finality of the Egyptian advance happened when the sea split for the Jews and collapsed in the Egyptians, which was a week later. So we can justifiably in the verse talk about the days that you left Egypt. Although leaving Egypt, the border of Egypt happened the first day, leaving Egypt in the more general, broader sense took a number of days and included the splitting of the sea. So let's pick it up over here. Our verse therefore says, as the days you left from Egypt, as the days you left from the land of Egypt, days in the plural, because it also includes the experience at the sea. Now, he continues in the brackets. This is also from the original. The fact that the verse uses, now he asks on the times that the verse uses the singular expression. Why singular? So he explains the fact that the verse uses the singular expression, remember this day that you left Egypt, regarding the daily commandment to remember the Exodus. That's because the primary daily commandment of remembering the Exodus is to remember the Exodus itself, and failing to remember the splitting of the sea does not disqualify one from fulfilling the mitzvah. So when the Torah talks about the basic obligation to remember the Exodus, it talks about the one day. That's your basic obligation. But ideally, elaborate. Ideally, go big, which means also mention and also remember and recall the splitting of the sea. Okay, so I noticed that we have some items in the chat. Let's see. Okay, perfect. Okay, good. All right. All good messages. Now, let's get back to the discussion here. But actually, I do want to mention one more thing. Welcome, Steve, and welcome, Ariella. Good to see you guys. Welcome. Okay, back to our text. Here we go. Based on this, so we're right here, this paragraph that I will highlight right there. Based on this, everything we just said right now, the meaning of the verse that says, as the days you left from the land of Egypt, so I will show them wonders. So what does that verse mean? Is that in the future redemption, there will be miracles and wonders similar to those that took place at both the Exodus itself and also the splitting of the sea. Yes, because it uses the phrase plural, like the days, plural, you left Egypt. So I will show them wonders in the Messianic era. It means that the wonders of the Messianic era are like the days, plural, that you left from Egypt. In other words, there will be miracles in the future similar both to the miracles of the Exodus and to the splitting of the sea. This correlation is expressed in the verse from Isaiah that says, regarding the Messianic era, and the Lord shall dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and there shall be a highway, as there was for Israel on the day they went up from the land of Egypt. Apparently, when Mashiach comes in the Messianic era, there's going to be another drying up of the Egyptian sea. That's what Isaiah says, that in the future time, the Lord shall dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And there's going to be a highway right through it, 75, 85, 285, right? Just like it happened with Israel or for Israel when they left Egypt. That's what the prophet Isaiah says, which means, again, very simply, that when Mashiach comes in the Messianic era, we are going to experience miracles like the Exodus and like the splitting of the sea, which is generally referred to as the days that we left Egypt. Make sense? Yes? Okay. All of this is pretty straightforward. And now it's leading to a question. Now, based on all of the above, we need to understand the connection between these two ideas contained in the verse, as the days you left from the land of Egypt, so show them wonders. Namely, that even the wonders that come from God alone will be manifest in a revealed manner. We will be able to see the miracles within them. And that in the wonders of the future redemption, there will also be a measure of the wonders of the splitting of the sea. What is the connection between these two ideas? In other words, we explained two ideas of this verse. Number one, that the wonders, idea number one, the wonders that come from God alone, in other words, that come from God's essence, will nonetheless be manifest in a revealed manner in the Messianic era. Now, I mentioned this before, right? We mentioned this in the intro. Nowadays, if the miracle is coming from that sublime level of divine essence, you're not going to recognize it. It's going to be incognito. It's going to be undercover. It's going to be within the bounds and the garbs of nature. When Mashiach comes, even the wonders that come from God alone will be revealed, will be manifest in a revealed manner. We'll be able to see them. So that was point number one of this verse. And point number two of this verse is that, and when those miracles happen in the Messianic era, not only will they be revealed, but they're also going to be like the wonders of the splitting of the sea. What's the connection between these two ideas? What does the splitting of the sea have to do with the sublime miracles becoming revealed? We have two teachings, two mystical teachings on this verse. And now what we're asking is, can we find a parallel, or can we find a connection, a conceptual connection between these two ideas? Idea number one, that even the highest miracles will be openly revealed. And number two, that these miracles will be akin or in the spirit of the wonders that happened at the splitting of the sea. That's the question we're asking. Okay, we're ready to move on to chapter 3. But first, let me check in. Does anybody have any questions on chapter 2, what we explained, or anything that we've explained thus far? Any questions or comments or additions? Garnished. Okay. Perfect. Good. All right. Hopefully we're all together on this. Chapter number 3. And now we get back to the thread that we began weaving in chapter 1, which is the difference between the types of miracles and which miracles are actually greater than the other. Okay? Do with Emunah. Michael, I saw your text. Does the connection between these two ideas have to do with faith? It's a good answer, but let's save that for as we develop this idea. So chapter 3 gets back to the different types of miracles. Again, to keep it very simple, we have a few categories of miracles. Miracles that are obvious because they break nature. Miracles that are not so obvious because they conform to nature, but you can still see them. And miracles that are so conforming to nature that you can't even notice that they're a miracle. So now, and we said before that the seemingly lower the miracle is, the higher place it comes from. Now we're going to explain that notion. Why is it that the miracles that are garbed in nature are actually coming from the highest place. Chapter 3. This will be understood by prefacing the following idea. This is really important right here. This is the key. The reason why the source of miracles that are garbed in nature stem from a higher dimension than the source of the miracles that transcend nature is twofold. In other words, there are two reasons that we might give as to why the miracles that are garbed in nature are higher than the miracles that transcend nature. Typically, I would say the louder the miracle, the bigger it is. What Kabbalah says is the opposite. The quieter the miracle, if it's a quiet miracle, the bigger it is. Why? Two reasons. He gives two reasons for this idea. Number one, with regard, this is my brackets of explanation. One explanation relates to the source of the miracle, while the other relates to the purpose of the miracle, and you'll see what that means in a moment. Number one, with regard to miracles that transcend nature, in other words, the loud miracles, the revelation of God's infinite light that transcends the world, which is the source from which these miracles emanate, is in a manner that nature is shattered by virtue of this revelation. This revelation is therefore not revealed in the world itself. Let me explain. You have a miracle like the splitting of the sea. So what happens? What happens is that the water is standing up like a wall. That's quoting the language of the Torah itself. The water stood like a wall on the right side and the left side. That's what Torah says. You know what that means? This is a type of a miracle that broke the natural order. So nature, the natural order is such that water flows, and this miracle is one in which nature itself is shattered. Water ceases to flow, water now stands up like a wall. Which means that God's force of the miracle cannot work with nature itself. It's incompatible. A miracle that breaks, that shatters nature, means that nature and the miracle are incompatible. So when God's force of the miracle encounters nature, nature is obliterated. And this last line is the truth. The revelation, or this revelation of God's power, is therefore not revealed in the world itself. The world itself is not revealing God's power. God is revealing his power by breaking the world. The world is not revealing its power. It's the difference between it's like the difference between a debate and an educator, or and a class. What's the purpose of a debate? Let's say, may not be the purpose of all debates, but let's say this is one of the purposes of a debate, is to show one's intellectual superiority over the other, right? It's to break the other and prove them wrong. I have it right, I understand it correctly, and you're wrong. And to show you my superiority, I'm going to break you intellectually. That's one thing. There's quite another thing, that's education. Education is very different. Education is not trying to prove the superiority of the teacher over the student, but rather to influence the student to understand what the teacher is saying. Is to impart this higher wisdom, if you will, within the student itself. So the miracles that break nature, level one, those are miracles. Those are miracles that prove the world to be incompatible with it. So you have nature, which is like lower level divine energy. And then you have the miracle, which is powerful, infinite, can do any divine energy. And that energy breaks nature. That's what happens in category 1 miracle, right? The water of the Nile River turns to blood. What that means is God is not working through the Nile. God is manipulating the Nile River, or God is breaking the Nile River to act in a way or to be in a way that is not compatible with itself. So this is a higher force coming in contact with something lower, nature, the laws of nature, and obliterating it. By contrast, let's do the next paragraph. By contrast, in the case of miracles that are garbed in nature, the revelation of God's infinite light that transcends the world is contained within the world itself. In the second and third categories of miracles, it's still a miracle. Chanukah and Purim, still a miracle. The miracles that happen with us that we don't even know were miraculous, still a miracle. And you know where those miracles are coming from? They're coming from God's infinite light, God's light that transcends nature, transcends the natural order. And yet, that power of God is operating within the limitations of the world itself. It doesn't break it, it works with it. It's still a higher power, but it's working with the natural order. And here's the kicker. And since the world, nature, is fundamentally a limited finite creation, and limitation and infinity are diametric opposites, so in order for God's infinite light to be revealed within and work within the limitations of the world itself, this emanation of God's infinite light must issue from the pure essence of God, which is found everywhere, even within the limitations and nature of this world. What he says is, for the infinite to not be compatible with finite, that makes sense. For the infinite, when it comes in contact with the finite, to have to break and shatter finite, makes sense. Infinite is bigger and more powerful than finite, so it breaks it, it shatters it. That makes sense. But for infinite and finite to coexist in the same space, for the infinite power of God to operate inside the natural limited garments, now that's quite a feat. That's a fusion, a pure fusion of supernatural and natural in the same space. That's a paradox. You see, when you have the supernatural hit the natural and the natural gives away and all you have left is the supernatural, that can logically make sense. It's bigger, it's more powerful, it's infinite, it's supernatural, nature falls away. But for the supernatural to come in contact with nature and for nature to remain where it is, and for the supernatural power of God to operate inside the limited power of the limited force that is nature, for that to happen, you have a consistent paradox, not a shattering because of the paradox, but a paradox that's able to exist and be a paradox. That's the ultimate paradox.
Rob,
Yeah.
I'm having a tough time conceptualizing this, because if this is just an extension of Hashem, I mean, we're talking like nature is its own force.
Right.
And this is only an extension of Hashem. So where is the dichotomy? I mean, I'm having a tough time.
Good. Because God, excellent question. Because God created nature to operate in a natural way that's limited to its laws and not other laws. God created water to look like water, to have the properties of H2O. God created water to flow and to go to the lowest place and not to stand up like a wall. God created that, and of course God can change his mind at any time and God can do whatever he wants, but there is a force. There is a force that issues forth from God that we call nature. That's a divine force. And then there's a force that transcends nature, the I can do whatever I want force. So when the I can do whatever I want force, which is the supernatural force of God, comes in contact with the natural force, what happens? Well, in category 1 miracles, nature gives way and nature gets out of the way, and all you see at that moment is, I can do whatever, God saying, I can do whatever I want. And that's amazing. But what it means is that there is no coexistence between the two forces. These two forces aren't in the same space at the same time coexisting. There are two forces from God, a natural force, and I can do whatever I want force, but they're not coexisting. Whereas in the second and third category of miracles, the ones in which the miracles are working within the parameters of nature itself, well, now you have a confluence of the supernatural and the natural, the I can do whatever I want force, and the, well, this is what nature is force. And for that paradox to exist and not blow itself up, that means that it's coming from an infinite, truly infinite, essential power of God that is undeterred by any notions of paradox. You see, paradox is only disconcerting if you're not the essence of God. Huh?
It's only disconcerting on a lower level.
On a lower level.
Right.
On a lower level, everything has its definition, and higher and lower can't coincide. So nature has to give way to the supernatural. So when the supernatural hits, nature is broken. That's category one. But when the miracle comes from God's pure essence, an essence that is so impossible, so undefined, so radically, purely divine, that paradox is not a paradox, and it's paradox doesn't create a problem. When a miracle comes from that sublime a level, you can have the miracle and you can have it working within nature, and they're both true. Is it a miracle? Yeah. Does it look natural? Yeah. How can they both be? Yeah. Why? Because it's from essence. When you're operating on a lower level, then it's binary, either this or that. So either it's nature or it's a miracle. If it's nature, you don't see the supernatural. If it's supernatural, you're not going to see nature because nature was just broken. But when you operate at a much higher level of divine energy, which is not even energy, which we call divine essence, on that level, there's no paradox. What's a paradox? Everything is possible. On that level, the impossible is possible, which means that there can be nature and there can be a miracle, and they can both exist in the same space. That's why all of this is explaining why the seemingly lower miracles are in fact higher. Again, to explain that, the miracles that appear to be on a lower level because they don't look so big, they don't look so brash, they don't look so supernatural. That's exactly the point. The miracles that are kind of operating within nature, that's coming from the highest place, a place where the supernatural and the natural can coexist without issue. That's truly remarkable. Are you guys still seeing my screen? Yes? Okay. These are very, very subtle points, I think. These are very Kabbalistic ideas, I think. But the objective of this series is to really understand the nuts and bolts of how Kabbalah explains what a miracle is. And to understand what a miracle is, we need to understand that miracles operate on different levels. And they operate on different levels, we're now learning, because they're coming from different places. A miracle that comes from a lower dimension breaks nature, because it says, hey, nature, get out of the way. A miracle that's coming from a higher level can keep nature right where it is and operate through it. It's like, I would say, when somebody understands something or somebody has less of a depth of understanding, they might be rocked by a question, right? You ask a question, it's all, you have to shut down the question because you don't really have the answer. But when you have a depth of knowledge, you can tolerate the question. And you can find within the question itself, you can find the answer, right? You can show that person how your question is really the key to the answer. There's no paradox. When you're operating on a much deeper level of consciousness, the paradoxes fall away. So again, in short, This is still only the first explanation, by the way. There's still another one which we're going to get to. Again, in short, here's what we know. Nature is natural. Miracles are supernatural. So a miracle that breaks nature, explodes nature, wow, that was a miracle. And you see, it's obvious, okay, that seems big. It's making a lot of noise. And nature is, poof, disappeared. But that's because that miracle is coming from a lower level, which can't tolerate nature, where nature and the supernatural is incompatible. And a miracle that truly comes from the highest place within God, the divine essence, comes from such a sublime place where paradoxes aren't paradoxes, contradictions aren't contradictions, right? It's all truth. And on that level, you can have a miracle operating within the bounds of nature. That's how amazing it is. To give you a parallel idea, it says that in the temple, in the holy temple in Jerusalem, at the holiest space of the temple, the holiest place was called the Holy of Holies. It was a small room. Inside the room was the ark. It's hard to demonstrate this over over a video, but I'll do my best. There's a room behind me. You can see a room, right? You could see like a wall here. Yeah. Sorry, you could see like wall there. Maybe another wall over there. You see the angles of the room? Yeah, you see how like the ceiling kind of goes in at the angle? Okay, so the room is kind of like, let's see if I can get my hand right. Like from here to here. There we go. Yeah, the room kind of exists between these two spaces. And my head's in the middle. Okay, cool. I'm not sure now what I'm going to do, but here's where we're at. No, but here's what I'm going to do. Imagine from this hand to this hand was 15 feet. I don't know, right? And imagine my head in the middle is 10 feet. Sorry, no, is 5 feet. Again, don't worry, my head hasn't grown since we've last seen each other. Don't worry about that. But again, between my hands, 15 feet, my head itself takes up 5 feet of space. So if you would measure from one side of my head to the wall, if my head was in the middle, what would you get? What side, what measurement? 5. And from this side to the other wall, 5, right? So 5, 5, and 5 is 15, right? 15, 5, 5, 5. However, imagine if this was 15 and you measured it was 15 and you measured my head and it was 5, but here it was 10 and here it was 10. That wouldn't make sense, right? Right. It's like, no, hold on. I messed up.
7.5.
7.5. Yeah, that's better. 7.5. Thank you. I knew my math wasn't working out right now. 7. Imagine if, right, this is 15 between these two, and this is 5. But if you measure from here to there, it's 7.5, and from here to here is 7.5. Right? That means that there's 15 without my head, but with my head it's also 15. That's a little bit wonky, right? That's a little bit like, woo, what's going on? Does this exist or does it not exist? Well, the ark was the same way. When they measured the Holy of Holies, it measured a certain measurement, and the ark took up space. But when they measured from the side of the ark to the wall and from the other side of the ark to the wall, it was the total space, which means that the ark took up space, but it didn't take up space, which leads our sages to say, Makam ha'aron eno min hamida. The space of the ark didn't take up space, which doesn't mean that there was no space. It means that there was space, it took up space, but it didn't take up space at the same time, which means it was a paradox. Are you with me on that? To say that it looked like it was there, but it really wasn't there, okay, that's a binary way. It's either there or not there, it's not there. But to say that it was there, and it took up space, and it didn't take up space, now you got me. Now it's confusing, because you're telling me it did take up space, and you're telling me it didn't take up space. Make up your mind. The answer is, who said it has to be one or the other? Who said it's multiple choice, and you can only choose one? Who said it's a zero-sum game? Who said paradoxes are paradoxical? Who says you can't live with a question? Oh, the rational lower self, got it. God's essence is very happy in the space of contradiction. And in fact, where do you find God? right at the nexus of paradox. You find divine essence right where nothing else can explain it. In those moments of, wow, what just happened? Boom, that's where you got it. So when you see a miracle that breaks nature, all that tells you is that there is a supernatural force in the universe. But when you see a miracle that operates within nature, you know what you know? That's God. So when you see the supernatural force, the message that you get is there's a supernatural force that's bigger than nature. But when you see a miracle that works within nature, you learn something else. There's a God that is not perturbed by either nature or supernatural or the confluence of both. God is beyond everything and within everything. That's all point number one, all to explain why miracles that are hidden in nature are actually higher level than the miracles that make a lot of noise. Subtle miracles like Hanukkah and Purim are even greater seen from this perspective than the miracle of Passover. Again, I'll say that one more time. Hanukkah and Purim, which represent miracles that work within nature, like Purim, right? The queen was Jewish. Makes sense. That's an even greater miracle on one level than Passover, because Passover miracles broke nature, which means that they were incompatible with each other, whereas the miracles of Purim operated within nature. And that means that it's coming from the essence, divine essence, which can fuse together opposites. Let's look at number two. Another explanation of the advantage of miracles that are garbed in nature over miracles that transcend nature, or that break nature, is that the purpose, this regards the purpose of miracles, that the purpose of miracles is that they should reveal the truth that God rules over and controls nature. And this idea is revealed to a greater extent in the case of miracles that are garbed within nature. What's the whole point of a miracle? That God's in control of what? Nature? 1 second. When you're breaking nature, you don't tell me that you're in control of nature. You're telling me that you're breaking nature. Where do I see that you're in control of nature? Is if nature is humming along to the beat of your drum, but it's still nature. Are you with me on that? If you shatter nature, so what point did you prove? You didn't prove that nature conforms to you. You proved that you can break nature, but that doesn't prove that nature is conforming, that you're running nature. That proves that you can beat up nature in a dark alley. That doesn't prove that nature runs to the beat of your music, right? The revelation, second paragraph, the revelation of God's power through miracles that transcend nature, which is level one, that is a declaration that God has the ability to completely destroy and shatter the laws of nature. God says, look at me. Well, I probably shouldn't make fun. No, but God says, look at me. I can take nature like Bo Jackson and break the bat over the knee thing. Remember you used to do that? That shtick back in the day? That was awesome. Man, no one does that anymore. Anyway, right? So he's like, I can take nature and break it. Like, I can shatter it. By contrast, that's level one miracle. That's like Passover. I can break nature. Okay, sure you can, but that doesn't prove that nature is divine. That proves that you can break nature, but that doesn't tell us the nature of nature. By contrast, the miracles that are garbed in nature reveal that God's infinite power rules over and controls nature itself to the point that nature bends its will in accordance with God's will. It's a difference between Bo Jackson and Uri Geller. Oh man, good God, where are we going with this? Right? Bo Jackson and Uri Geller. Bo Jackson takes the bat and shatters it, splinters it into two. There's no bat anymore. Uri Geller takes, and I know, I've seen the videos. I know how he did it also. Trust me, it's okay. And if you need to know, contact me afterwards. I'll tell you how to do it. Okay, but theoretically, right, the way it appeared, right, bending the spoon, not breaking, bending means that the nature of the spoon itself, it's still a spoon. It still has its properties. It's not broken, but it itself is bending according to the will of its master. That is a greater declaration of God's power on one level than the other miracles. You would think that the miracles that break nature are a bigger declaration of God's power. Maybe. But if we define the purpose of the miracle to demonstrate not God's sheer force, but God's ruling over, God's rulership over and control of nature, if the purpose of the miracle is to reveal how God rules over and controls nature, well, that is revealed in categories 2 and 3 and not in category 1. Because category 1 miracle does not show us that God rules over and controls nature. It shows us that God breaks nature, that God and nature are incompatible, but it doesn't show us that God controls nature. Controlling nature means that it's still nature, but it's leaning toward where you want it to be. That's category 2 and 3 miracle. So in short, we have two different, very different explanations of why the seemingly lower miracles are actually greater. We have two different explanations, 1 and 2. We elaborated on 1 a lot, 2 we went through a little bit quicker, but I want to summarize right now because it's important that we get this straight. Again, we have miracles that are big and bold and brash, and it's, wow, that's a miracle, okay? And miracles that are a little bit more subtle. Oh, is that a miracle? It might be a miracle. Yeah, that's a miracle, but it kind of assumed the natural form. 2 types of miracles. I know there's 3 because there's one that you don't even realize is a miracle. Okay, but in general, there are miracles that don't work with nature, that break nature, and miracles that work with nature. We said there are 2 advantages of the latter category of miracles. Advantage number 1, it comes from a higher place. Because for the infinite and the finite to coexist means that you're coming from an essential power. Because typically, supernatural, natural, they're at odds with each other, which is why those higher level miracles, or why category 1 miracles are breaking nature, because either it's nature or it's supernatural. Pick your poison or pick your status. You can't have both. Miracles that work with nature are miracles that come from the impossibility of divine essence. The nimna, it's referred to in Jewish philosophy and Kabbalah as nimna hanimna'os, the impossibility of all impossibilities. God is impossible, not like a teenager. Oh, the teenager is impossible. That means something else. But God is the ultimate impossibility, unfathomable impossibility. Where you find possibility, that's too logical. Where you find impossibility, now you're talking about God and God's essence. So if supernatural breaks nature, if miracles shatter nature, that makes sense. That's logical. It's logical that when a miracle happens, nature would fall by the wayside. That makes a lot of sense. That means it's coming from a lower rational level of divine energy. When you have a miracle, which is supernatural, that still maintains the shape and form of nature. So you have a confluence, a coexistence of nature and supernatural together in the very same space. That's not logical. That's paradoxical. And now we're talking about God. That's all explanation number 1. So category 2, 3 miracles are higher because they come from a deeper place within God, the place of paradox. And point number 2 is, why are these miracles higher than miracles that work within nature? Because the whole point of a miracle is to express God's control over nature. And where do you see God's control over nature? Not when God breaks nature. That just shows that God doesn't like nature, or nature can't hold a candle to God. But that doesn't show us that God controls nature. That shows us that God is a ferocious power. I don't mean in a negative sense, but God's force is much bigger than nature. Where do we see? What miracle expresses the fact that God controls, rules over, and guides nature? And the miracles that work within nature, because then you can see how nature would have gone a certain path, but God steered it the other way. It's still nature, right? It's still nature, but God steered the ship as opposed to breaking it altogether. Breaking it means you're not controlling it, you're breaking it. Controlling means like a remote control, like you are puppeting, you're moving it where you want it to be. And that is a greater accomplishment of purpose than the former type of miracle. So both when it comes to the source, the origin of the miracle, the second category and third category of miracles are higher because they come from the place of paradox. And and also regarding the purpose of a miracle, which is to show God's power over God's control over nature, that's also highlighted and expressed in a greater sense in categories 2 and 3 of miracles, which actually are manipulating nature as opposed to breaking nature. Make sense?
Rav?
Now you know. Yeah.
Okay, so I have 2 advantages for levels 2 and 3. Come from a
Yes.
higher place, and what was number 2?
Number 2 is it achieves the purpose. It achieves the purpose of the miracle to a greater degree. What is the purpose of the miracle? To show that God controls nature. You don't see that in category 1. So the purpose of the miracle is achieved. Again, I wrote this in the translation. I added my own brackets here. One explanation right here. One explanation relates to the source of the miracle. The source is higher, and the other explanation relates to the purpose of the miracle. The purpose is more achieved in category 2. Again, are you trying to educate or are you trying to debate? Right? The purpose of a miracle is not about breaking nature. Well, I guess you could argue it is, but the way he defines it here, the purpose of a miracle is to show that God has not just dominion, D-O-M-I-N-O-I-N, dominion over nature, but God actually molds nature. Where do you see that? In the miracles that work within the confines or within the parameters of nature, where nature itself is leaning in the direction that God wants it to, that God is. Now, always nature is leaning in the direction that God wants it to, but here it's out of the ordinary a little bit, which tells us that there was a leaning involved. God schlepped it, God pulled it a little bit to the side. Okay, I see we have some chat comments. Let's see. I like this. Linda writes, reminds me of parenthood. An adult can easily, God forbid, break a child's will and spirit. But to work with the child's spirit and will, to help the child grow and develop, that's powerful. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I love that. A very touching way to express it, right? Think about parent and child, which God is, I mean, on one level, one type of relationship is like our parent, right? So an adult, right, you can educate by breaking the child, God forbid, or by working with them, with who they are. That's greater on both levels. You have to dig deeper to work with your child. So from a place of where it's coming from, it's deeper. And the purpose, which is about raising the child, that's also achieved. Because to break the child means the child's not there anymore. Right? If God forbid you're breaking the child, then there's no child left. It's just you. You're dominating, you're asserting yourself. So in that space, it's just you. Right? If somebody shouts at the child, clean up your room right now, and the child cleans up the room, who cleaned up the room? Your shouting did. They didn't clean up the room. But to educate them to the point where they now are on board with it, and they do it from their own will and volition. When they are on board with it, now they're cleaning the room due to your influence. That's exactly, Linda, perfect. Perfect. That's, on both levels, this is the greater accomplishment, right? On where it's coming from, it's easier to shout than to guide. As a parent, it's easier to lose it and to shout and to assert control. When I say control, I don't mean in the guidance way. I mean in the break, God forbid. It's easier to do that. Easier, not healthy. Easier to do that than to actually work with your child the way they see things, the way they understand, and get them to adopt healthier behaviors. So it comes from a deeper place than the parent. Bye, Ariella. Great to have you. And both in the other, and the second point, which is the purpose. Well, the purpose is the parent should guide the child. If you're breaking, then you're not guiding. You broke. You didn't guide. There's no child. You broke him or her. God forbid. God forbid. Perfect example. Mark is asking a very good question. What about creation itself? Creation itself is a miracle. Great question. We're going to get there next week. I should mention, next week, we're going to shift gears and look at nature itself. We've been talking about nature versus the supernatural and how there are different ways in which those two energies can kind of, can rumble. Either the supernatural can break nature or it can work with nature. right? Two ways. But what about, forget the supernatural, what about nature itself? How natural is nature? And where is the divinity within nature? And does nature itself express the supernatural without having a miracle, just nature itself? That we'll talk about, that we'll explore next week. I told you, this is, I hope it's coming across how, I don't know what the right word is, how real this stuff, how real what we're learning right now is. I mean, this is like straight up Kabbalah. This is high level stuff. Very subtle, but also very, when I say logical, I mean, it's not just here's what it is, and here's what nature is, and here's what supernatural is, and just believe it, right? Miracles that seem lower are really higher. That's the way it works. No, that's the way it works. We're breaking it down logically. Logically, it makes sense. Because to work with something is harder than to break it. It comes from a higher level to work with it. And it achieves the purpose. The purpose is that you've changed it. If you've broken it, you haven't changed it. So on two levels, we can rationally understand why the lower, seemingly lower level miracles are actually higher level miracles. Okay, so now in summation, where we're at, we've talked about three levels of miracles and we've mapped them out, right? Level one breaks nature. Level two works within nature, but you can kind of tell. Level three is you can't even tell because it's working within nature so well, you don't even see it. By the way, that's like an educator or a parent that so influences the child that they don't even know they've been influenced, right? They don't even know how. So they're not even going to say thank you. And you know what? You don't need to thank you. Because your nachas, your pleasure, your joy is coming from the fact that you see this human being grow and become the mensch that they can truly be. And it doesn't have to be about you. The child doesn't say to themselves, the student doesn't say, oh, you know, and I'm doing this because of my teacher. They're doing it because of themselves. That's the greatest. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was summarizing it and then I jumped forward. Sorry, my bad. Again, we have to summarize. We got to make sure we're all clear here. We have three levels of miracles. Miracles that are obvious because it breaks nature, miracles that work within nature, but you can see them a little bit, miracles that you don't even see. We rank them in greatness. The higher it is, seemingly the lower it is. The lower it is, the higher it is. It's an inverse, right? We got the mirror image. It's backwards. The lower the miracle, in other words, the less obvious it is, the higher it is. Why? This is what we focused on today mainly. We also talked about the splitting of the sea, but we focused mainly intellectually on this idea. The lower the miracle, seemingly lower the miracle, in other words, the more the miracle, supernatural, works with nature, the more it's able to tolerate nature. Number one, it's coming from a higher source, where nature, supernatural nature are not contradictions because there's no paradox anyway. Paradox is not paradox, not paradoxical. Come from a higher level. And number two, it's achieving the purpose of the miracle to a greater extent. All right. Maya had to run. Ariella had to run. I know many of you have to run. So I want to formally close it out. I'll still be on here for however long folks want to discuss these concepts. But let me say that I enjoyed studying this with you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Looking forward to exploring next week the nature of nature. Next week, we move away from miracles and talk about nature itself. Is nature itself supernatural? Not when a miracle happens, but is nature itself, the laws of nature, are they also supernatural? And if they are, then what distinguishes nature, which may be supernatural, from a miracle, which is supernatural? And is nature, which is supernatural, different than the supernatural, which is natural? Is the supernatural level within nature different than the supernatural miracle level 2, 3 that works within nature? Are those the same thing or are those different? Here's spoiler alert, they're different. How are they different? Why are they different? Stay tuned. Stay tuned for more miracles next week as we get into nature. Thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Rob.
For all of you for sticking with me throughout this very deep concept. Okay, I'm stopping sharing. I'm formally closing out the recording. Like I said, if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask. Oh, wait, hold on. Before you ask, sorry, Stan. Very quick announcement before you guys go. Tomorrow night, we're launching a brand new course called Judaism at Home. When home is the only place that Judaism can thrive. You know, synagogues, open, shut. Most of them are shut still. So when all we have is our home, how to make sure we're having a vibrant Jewish experience at home, that's the topic. I'm not talking about nature right now. That's the topic of this upcoming course starting tomorrow night, Judaism at Home. Join me. You'll love it. It's a great course. Okay, and now for questions, comments.
Could I ask you a question,
Yeah.
Rabbi? Earlier in the discussion, you had mentioned the Sea of Reeds split into 12 channels.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that just a little bit for me?
Sure. So, you know how we talk about, Jews not getting along, which is not a good thing. Yeah. Where does that come from? So in truth, it comes from the fact that people think differently and see things, even within a common faith, people see things nuanced and differently. But what happens is, instead of respecting each other, we say, unless you see it my way, I can't respect you, right? Because you're wrong and I'm right. That's where the problem sets in. Not the fact that we're different, but the fact that we can't tolerate the difference. From the beginning, we were meant to be different. That's why we have 12 tribes. Abraham was one. Isaac was one. Jacob was one, right? They were all individuals. And then you have tribes. And that becomes Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. 12. Why 12? Well, I'm not going to answer why 12 specifically right now. That's a longer, more elaborate conversation that has to do, Linda, with the months and the astrological signs and whatever, which another conversation. But here's what I do want to say, is that the fact that there is diversity is a very, very important message. And that is that you can be unique and you can be different. You don't have to be exactly the same way. Even within Judaism, you don't have to be exactly the same way as the other guy, right? But the main thing is that we tolerate and get along with the other one. And this was highlighted by the fact that the Jews had 12 different paths in the sea. On the March to Freedom, the first message is, give space for your fellow. They don't have to walk down the same path as you. You don't have to, there's not one path fits all, right? My way or the highway. That's not freedom. That's dictatorship. That's saying it only works if you're like me. That's not freedom. That's becoming the Egypt that you just left. Egypt said, right, everyone needs to conform this way, that way, the other, build the pyramids, pyramid scheme, whatever. That's Egypt. God says, I want you to be different. Yeah, that was a joke. I want you to be different. Who has time even to stop for jokes at this point, right? We have so many concepts to get. So God says, I want you to be different. I want you to not be monolithic. I want you to be different. I want there to be diversity, and I want you to appreciate the diversity. Create space for each other. 12 different paths. In fact, you may know this, that there are different, we call them nuschaot, different liturgy styles. So there's several, Ashkenaz, Sfard, Arizal, whatever. There's like a handful of different liturgic styles. It says in Kabbalah, it says that there were actually originally 12, one for each of the tribes. They were not all meant to pray exactly the same way. Isn't that amazing? In generally, it's the same, right? But there's enough individuality that it makes things, number one, interesting, but also number two, it makes things personal. Because it has to be personal. It can't just be conforming the whole time. It has to be personal. So those are just some thoughts on that. It's a very, I don't think it's well known at all, but it's very clear from the Midrash and Talmud that there were 12 different paths, and Kabbalah explains that it's highly significant, and we're meant to walk our own path. And when we tolerate each other, that's the definition of freedom. If we say, no, you have to look like me. If you don't look like me, then you're canceled, right? Like today, everything canceled. You're out. That's it. You don't exist. I don't like it. God, you know what? God was one. God still is one, whatever. And God created diversity. You know what that means? I think it means that God likes diversity. For us to say, God, you got it wrong, we're going to make everybody back into looking like one. I don't know. This time of the year is called the time of Sfirat HaOmer, when we count the Omer. The Omer was an offering brought on the second day of Passover. We count 49 days till Passover. And it should be a very happy time because we're marching toward Sinai, toward Torah. And yet, in Jewish law, it's a time of mourning. We don't schedule weddings. We don't go to concerts. We don't cut our hair. That's why I got a haircut before Passover. If I didn't, I would have to wait another 7 weeks, which at that point wasn't probably a big deal, but whatever, I still wanted it. So it's a time of mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, mourning. Why? Because in this time period, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. A massive plague broke out, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. Why? The Talmud says, Shalei nahagu kavod zeh lezeh. They didn't treat each other with kavod, with honor, with respect. And the Rebbe asked the question, how can we fathom that the students of Rabbi Akiva wouldn't treat each other with respect? They were holy students. They had a holy teacher. In fact, Rabbi Akiva is the one who says that when the Torah says, love your fellows yourself, this is the ultimate principle of Torah. That was the teacher. Their teacher taught them that they should uphold this one tenet of Torah as like the greatest teaching, the golden rule, love your fellows yourself. So how could they get it wrong? The Rebbe explains they took it too literally. They felt that to love the other means that you love them so much, you're going to teach them what the truth is. I love you. I can't tolerate you. I can't stand that you're walking in darkness. I need to tell you the truth. My way is the right way. And everyone felt the same way. Everyone felt that their way was right, because of course we feel like that because it's our way. And everyone felt that out of love, they have to make everyone think, look, act like they did. Because after all, you have to love them as yourself. If you have the truth, if you found the truth, then you have to make sure the other one is right on board with you. They could not tolerate that somebody else had a different truth or a different understanding of truth. Yeah, that's the problem. We're still struggling with this, right? It's problem still to this day. We have to respect the 12 paths and more than 12. We have to respect the paths, right? That sounds like a hashtag, respect the paths. Yeah, bumper sticker. Yeah, the other one's different than you. Okay, that's a good thing. Don't love them so much to suffocate them. I love you so much, I'm gonna destroy, any semblance of your individuality. That's not called love, that's called control or breaking, as we said tonight, right? What is love? Love means, or respect, love in the form of respect means, I allow you, I'm okay with you seeing things differently. Anyway, all right, I don't want to hold anybody too much longer. There's a lot more to talk about, but we have another few weeks. So join me next week. You can ask more questions offline, but I want to formally allow folks to go. All right, thank you for joining me. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow night. For the next course.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See you guys.
Bye.
Stay well, stay healthy. Bye, all.